as we go into people choosing their parents and planning this life, there's still free will is still part of it. But the question that I hear a lot on the feedback from the social media and the YouTube channel is, why would I choose that much suffering? Why would I choose a life that is so, so difficult? Now, I know that pain is the usher of wisdom. I know that there's more to our story, that that's not all there is. What would you say to those people that say, why would I choose such a painful life? Welcome, everyone, to That Death Show, episode 3. My co-host here, Tim Wyatt. How are you, Tim? How are you liking this so far?
Well, I'm very much enjoying the opportunity to talk about death in its much wider context, because people tend to be very narrow-minded about death. But the purpose of this podcast is to give it a much wider perspective and to make it respectable.
That is a perfect way to say it. And I'm so grateful to be here with you. I love this as we're finding our feet and we move forward. You know, this is our third podcast. And I know you and I talked a little bit privately last week that there are 65 million YouTube channels. There's about 400,000 podcasts. And did you know, Tim, 90% of those podcasts don't make it past their third episode.
Well, it's a critical time, and we have to make sure that we make it beyond number 3.
Yep. No early death for us on that. We are here to help eliminate the fear and the mystery that surrounds death. And since we're on that, I wanted to ask you a personal question. We always talk about other people having a view of death, but what is your personal view of death? Are you afraid of death, Tim?
Not at all. And I haven't been throughout my life. I had an experience when I was a young child in the school playground. And this experience basically was, you've been here before, you'll be here again. Despite everything my parents and my teachers and the priest at the local church said, I knew there was such a thing as reincarnation. And that's how I've tended to live my whole life. I haven't had any particular fear of death. In a general sense. Obviously, I've come close to destruction on a couple of occasions, but it's not fear. It's knowing that this is part of an ongoing cycle, and that's the important thing to remember. People just want to cling to this life too much and not understanding that life doesn't necessarily involve being in a body.
That's beautifully said, and I'm right there with you. It's not morbid, but I actually... now, through the study and the application of the perennial philosophy, with the understanding I have now, I actually look forward to it, like going to sleep at night. You're looking forward to the rest after the day. And it wasn't always that way. Of course, death was the worst thing that could happen. But I don't know. I just really do believe that most of us are probably, because it is the unknown, or it is the fear of the pain that would take place in the physical body as the soul departs. I think a lot of us are afraid of the how we will die. But if we will die and when we will die, I have zero fear. And does it sound weird if I say I'm looking forward to it and I find funerals like a graduation and a happy occasion?
Well, I think some people might find it slightly strange, but you're right about one thing. It's the process of dying which frightens people. Perhaps as much, if not more, than the actual death. And the reason for that is people have to relinquish dignity and independence. Many people die in a medical setting or in nursing homes or whatever. Very few people die what we would call a natural death anymore. But the way we die is very important. And that's why we really need to redefine what death is and look at the way that people die. If people have had good lives, why on earth shouldn't they have good deaths as well?
That right there is a killer soundbite. Thank you for that. As we move into episode 3, we've had a request for this subject, and it is life between lives, pre-birth planning. So before we get here, there is some activity going on, a lot. And here on That Death Show, we go beyond science and religion. We give you esoteric explanations of all about life and death. This is not just our own personal opinion. These are ageless esoteric teachings. And we're going to be going behind the veil today and bravely explore the inner planes and hidden dimensions of the non-physical world. Now, last week, Tim, we touched on the astral plane pun intended, plane or dimension. You mentioned it is a mirror of the physical world. And my question is, many times and for a long time, and I still have an issue with this, is when I hear plane or dimension, I think of another location, but it's more a state of being, isn't it? So it might be taking place in the here and now. If that question makes any sense, could you please expand on that?
Well, because we live in a physical world, we tend to use words like planes and dimensions, even though they're not strictly accurate. We imagine them kind of piled on top of each other in some strange sort of way, but they don't. All these different inner planes that we talk about all basically intermingle with each other. It's not like a layer cake where you've got the cherries on the top and the cream in the middle and the sponge underneath. It's not like that. The astral world is essentially a mirror of the physical world. Everything in the physical world has its counterpart on the astral plane, but the astral plane is not physical. In some ways, it's often described as a subjective plane. It's a plane which is ruled by emotion and by desire. And so therefore, it's very much ruled by our lower minds. I want this, I want that, I want a Ferrari, I want to marry this woman, I want this job. It's called the desire mind by a lot of people. And it's this world of desire that we enter when we die. And it's a world that we go to when we're asleep as well. But it's still a very mysterious place to us.
Well, what is the purpose of the astral plane? How would you explain its purpose? Why is it there?
Well, the way that I explain it is that it is still deeply interconnected with the physical plane, but it's also a place where after death, the astral body of an individual, before it finally decays, goes through a process of purification or refinement in some way. It's like taking gold out of a mine, but there's loads and loads of sand with it as well. So out of every ton of sand you get, there's 1 gram of gold. And this is what happens over a period of time. And all the good things from your astral self are extracted and stored to be revived and reawakened in one's next life. When that has happened, the astral body is depleted to something that we refer to as a shell. So it's just completely devoid of any essence, of any vitality. Sometimes these shells become inhabited by other astral entities, not always pleasant. Then they become known as shades. And this is where we get a lot of our ghost phenomena and other similar types of things happening. And it's also what happens in the seance room of spiritualists as well. And they're talking to shells, not the real person.
Thank you for sharing that. That leads me to another question. I'm sure you might have heard of this. And Blavatsky does write about this when she talks about when you are out of your head on alcohol or opium or whatever, that you too can be inhabited by these lower astral energies. And that is where the term algol comes from out of your head, or that's why they call alcohol spirits, because when we are vacated, when we have left our body because we are inebriated, that we too can become inhabited by astral entities. What is your understanding on that?
Absolutely. And this is where you get cases of the DTs, delirium tremens, where people who are really bad alcoholics actually start to see spirits and other malign entities. And what they tend to see is nothing nice. It tends to be, the real dregs of the astral plane and the monstrosities and everything. And this is why it's so frightening to people. In the case of very severe alcoholics, we get cases of delirium tremens where people go into all sorts of hallucinatory states and start to see spirits, usually unpleasant ones. And these are the worst dregs of the astral plane. So these things are very real, and obviously they can have an immense psychiatric impact on people.
If you look at the bars and what takes place when we are intoxicated, we're in a lower vibration. There's sex and there's fighting and there's just darkness. It's not really where a lot of light and wonderful things happen. You do have the warm fuzzies when you first begin drinking, but as you descend into blackout, there's a lot of raw human lust and anger and fear. Do you notice that as well? Is that the astral?
Yeah, very much so, because feelings, emotions are going to become amplified in this astral world, because this is what it's all about. It's fueled by desire, it's fueled by emotions, and so therefore things will become exaggerated or possibly amplified there.
I was reading that sometimes those that are in the astral that like to inhabit a body that has been inebriated or they're out of their head, that they miss life on earth. And it is a chance to experience sex or some activity in a body that can be possessed, I guess, if you will. That's what it felt like. If I was to describe what addiction felt like, it feels like a possession because you're in there somewhere, but something much stronger and darker has a hold of you in the darkest of the dark.
Yes, there are accounts of people in the astral world who look at people still in physical bodies who are smoking or drinking alcohol or eating rich foods or other things, driving fast cars even. And so desires transfer onto the astral plane. And so somebody who's been a heavy smoker might be hanging around people having a cigarette outside the workplace because that attraction still exists.
It makes so much sense. But when I mention it to people who have not heard of this, they think that I'm insane. But I would like to share this with you, our viewers and our listeners, and here with Tim, that this is not just us making these things up. Again, these are the ageless wisdoms coming back and explaining life and death. So I wanted to ask you, Tim, on the astral plane, what type of energies and entities, just in short, are on there? What lives on the astral plane?
Well, there's obviously people, when they go to sleep, their astral bodies travel there. There are dead people there, awaiting processing before moving on in their journey, either back into physical bodies or onto another state we'll discuss shortly. But there's also dead animals there. And the largest class of entities are things like nature spirits, elementals. These are the fairies and gnomes and other characters and entities which exist in every single culture around the world throughout human history. But there are also another class, and these are thought forms, particularly thought forms which have been deliberately created to have an effect, the sort of thing that takes place in magical ceremonies. And some of these conducted in the past were so powerful that they're still having an effect on the world today. So the astral plane is a very, very busy place. It's like a mainline station at rush hour.
I like that description. And I think when the indie ears come back, they do talk about this place that has otherworldly colors and music and love and a light and a life inside every rock or stone. Is this where they are? Are they on the astral plane, or would this be a little higher up in the state of being? Where would you think when these indie ears go, but hey, you can't stay? Where is that, do you think?
Well, that's an interesting case. You know, when people have these near-death experiences, are they going to this astral world? Possibly, but they might be going on to the next world, the mental heaven world, which we'll talk about. But clearly, on the astral plane, everything is much more exaggerated. Colors seem more vibrant. Music seems more vivid. All our senses are heightened in some way. So we're told. So it's a much and a richer experience than it would be on the physical plane. And the reason for that, obviously, is that the astral state is at a higher vibrational level than the physical state. And therefore, that's why things are exaggerated in that way.
And I remember in the teachings at the very end, they said it goes on and it goes on and it goes on and on from there. So we're only just barely scratching the surface of just what is outside this earthly plane. But there is so much more to our story. There's so much more to learn. So I would imagine everything, it's levels of going further and further and further up as we evolve. And our focus today in this show is pre-birth planning. So we have had the death because we've lived before. And we talked about it. We laughed a little bit about it. You said people would be horrified, and I am positive that they would be horrified that they picked their parents. They just absolutely these two. That's the one. And I think in the last 40 years, the term soul contract has been used in the New Age movement. Is this what you're talking about when we're saying we're going to plan out what we're going to learn and what we're going to do in our next life? Is it a soul contract?
Yeah, very much so. And I think it's part of something called soul groups. I think that every individual soul belongs to some sort of collective, perhaps quite a loose collective of people. I wouldn't like to say how many people, how many individuals, but a number of people who continually reincarnate together in the same place or have circumstances where their paths cross and they meet. Often this is said to take place in a family setting, so the roles change. It's almost like a repertory theatre. In one life, I'm the husband, in the next, I'm the daughter, in the next, I'm the wicked auntie, and then so on and so forth. But it might also be in other relationships, someone we marry or someone we do business with or someone that we share a common interest with. But clearly we do meet these people due to some sort of prior agreement or karmic script that we have written together.
Have you met anyone in your life where you go, oh my God, there you are, and you absolutely knew that you knew them from before? Has that ever happened to you? Now available on Kindle, the greatest collection of the ancient wisdom in our modern era. Over 1,000 pages in 4 volumes. Unfolding Consciousness, now online all over the world for only $24.99. Karma, reincarnation, what happens after death, all with references and links to the original teachings going back thousands of years. The truth behind all philosophy, science, and religion. Unfolding Consciousness, exploring the living universe and the intelligent powers in nature and humans. Now available in ebook on Amazon.
It has, but I wouldn't particularly like to go into details because it also works the other way as well. It might be that you meet someone in your life you absolutely hate and detest for reasons that you can't figure out. Maybe they've done nothing to you, they've said nothing to you. You might stare at someone across the street and you think, I really don't like that person. Why would you do that? Maybe you've had some sort of encounter with that person in a previous life. Alternatively, maybe you just don't like the vibes they're giving out, and that might be the reason for it. But it's quite possible that people we are repelled or attracted to in great measure are people that we've encountered in another life. And yeah, I've met, I would say, a handful of people whom I think could have been part of my soul group.
Well, you recognize them. There's a strange recognition. And you're right. It could be a good or bad. It would make sense. It's not just this soulmate, but it's people that you have unfinished business with, and you're going to get on with that in this lifetime. And as we go into people choosing their parents and planning this life, there's still free will is still part of it. But the question that I hear a lot on the feedback from the social media and the YouTube channel is, why would I choose that much suffering? Why would I choose a life that is so, so difficult? Now, I know that pain is the usher of wisdom, but knowing that you're going into it and you're going to be in a war-torn region, you'll be tortured and murdered, that's what I'm signing up for. That's what I don't have a very good answer for that, other than I know that there's more to our story, that's not all there is. What would you say to those people that say, why would I choose such a painful life?
Well, I would tell them to tune into our next podcast, number 4, where we're going to deal with the law of cause and effect, karma, in much more detail. But that's the reason we choose a particular life, because it is our best teacher. The writer Eckhart Tolle said that pain is sometimes some people's only spiritual teacher. You know, we only learn through pain because we are, despite what we think, we're still not terribly evolved as a species.
Well, I would say that also inspiration can't be the only teacher. There would be no real learning unless you were polished by difficult, sharp-edged stones. How else are you going to grow other than, oh, that's great. Inspired, off you go. To me, it's when we crash and burn, when it's difficult, when it's really painful. Those have proven to be my greatest lessons, and they continue. And the most difficult, hateful, hurtful people are my greatest teachers. So there are some, though, that come, Tim, and I know you've seen them. They seem to have a very easy life. They got enough money. They get married. They stay married. They travel. They've got retirement. No big dramas. Never been arrested. Never crash and burn. Is this a vacation life? Do we have holiday lives where we can just come and experience it and we don't have to work too hard? Is that a thing?
Well, we get lives which are concocted in accordance with the needs of the soul and its evolution. So the answer is probably yes, we do. Because if we had a succession of grueling lives, whether those lives were grueling because of poverty or because of war or for any other reason, illness or whatever, you could only stand so many of those lives. And, the soul would become completely exhausted. So I guess we do need lives of leisure, but also we have short lives. We have long lives. The soul will want to experience as many different things as possible. And this is the purpose of it. So the idea that you can come back into every incarnation and live a life of idle luxury and sail around on yachts and drive Maseratis, no, it's not going to happen because the soul doesn't want that. You might want it, but your soul doesn't.
The lower self, the earthly ego, which we need. We do need an ego to function in the physical world, but often it runs rampant. And that is the great battle. That's my understanding, is between the higher and the lower self. We're here to overcome ourselves. And I would have to say, if I was to die today, that it was pain that taught me the greatest lessons in life, and loss, and overcoming fear and anger and greed and selfishness and all of that. I wouldn't have learned any of that if it was handed to me on a platter. And we talked about, since we're talking about the pre-birth plan and karma and reincarnation, which we're going to get into more next week, is that last week you said something about the closer reincarnations when they pass away either out of tragedy or quickly or young. I remember reading a long time ago that it was like, oh, it had to be 1,500 years between lives. You never reincarnate that quickly. But there are many coming in now that remember the World Trade Center. They're coming in, they're remembering things. World War II, big. There's a whole bunch. How long between lives?
It depends very much on a number of things. It depends upon your soul's requirements. It depends on how you die and how young or old you were. And it also depends on your state of spiritual evolution, but it may also depend upon the larger requirements of the world. It is quite clear that after major wars like the Second World War, you get a spike in the birth rate in the succeeding years afterwards, and I'm part of that and everything. And I do have memories of being in the Second World War. But I think people who die tragically in wars tend to be, certainly at that time, tended to be predominantly young men between 18 and 25. And they quite naturally would want to get back into incarnation fairly quickly again. Children are said to die and be reincarnated relatively quickly also. Other people who pass on to the astral plane, and I have to say there is a big debate about how conscious we are about all this. Some people say we're just vaguely aware of it in a dreamlike sleep. Other people say we're conscious of all of it. So I think it depends upon the individual. But when we've moved from that astral plane and our astral bodies have been refined and we move on to this next world that we're talking about now, the mental world, the heaven world, it's the heaven of the Christians, the paradise of the Muslims. And it's as different to the astral world as the astral world is to the physical world. Here the vibrations are much, much higher. And there's no such thing as pain or suffering or anything negative happening. It's just a big celestial holiday camp.
That sounds heavenly. Many of the indie ears do come back. They say there is no darkness, there's no suffering, there is no hunger, there is none of that. It sounds Absolutely amazing. And that's one of the reasons, we look forward to it. But I also look forward to it, like I said, day to night, night to day. It just makes sense to have a rest and an in between. But these young men that are fighting a battle that was not their own, they're in these situations having to kill people based on someone else's decision. And that's where we talk a lot about karma, is the motive behind these behaviors. So if their life is taken in a battle that is not their own, that they did not create, I can completely understand wanting to get back in and let's have at it. I want to come back and finish what I was supposed to do. So when you leave early and when there is a tragic death, like a car accident or a young one who has passed away, you mentioned that there is a quick reincarnation. That's a very quick reincarnation for you. I did not know that about World War II. Would love to talk to you about that in more depth on this show. But we also mentioned suicides and that they stay after the physical death for the predetermined amount of time that life was meant to be for. So again, a pre-birth plan. Could you explain some on that about suicides, please?
Well, in most spiritual traditions, suicide is frowned upon, to say the least. It's looked on as one of the worst things you can do. In the Catholic Church, it's it's a venal sin to do this. And at one time, certainly in the UK here, if you tried to commit suicide and didn't succeed, it was it was a death sentence. It was a capital offence to try and commit suicide in the distant past. But as far as we understand, suicide is not just one thing. It depends very much upon the motivation that people would choose to take their own lives. People who kill themselves because they can't face up to the consequences of their own actions, or they can't take responsibility for something that they've done, is one thing. Somebody who forfeits their life and effectively commits suicide by throwing themselves on the hand grenade which has been thrown through the schoolroom window, knowing they're going to die, commit suicide for an entirely different, and I have to say very altruistic reason, because they're saving other people and sacrificing themselves. And obviously there are all sorts of states in between. Some people might want to commit suicide because the pain they feel through some disease or illness is just unbearable. And there is a debate going on at the moment about assisted dying in the United Kingdom and elsewhere. Other places allow it. We don't at the moment. So it is said that someone who commits suicide for selfish reasons would then have to spend the rest of their life, predetermined life, on the astral plane. So if they commit suicide at 30 and they were due to live until the age of 80, say, they would have that 50 intervening years. That's just one view of it, and I think that's quite persuasive. But I don't think we can ever be absolutely definitive about this, because there are always exceptions to these different rules.
Yes, that's true. That is true. It is such a huge, huge thing, suicide. People will say there's a good reason for it. There was this, that, and the other. But oftentimes those, when they go into the mediums, we talked about that a little bit, those that have crossed over by their own hand are very readily available for communication because they are still close to the earth plane until their predetermined time of death in the physical world is up before they can move forward. And I find that fascinating. So there's much there. And there's also, as we're going to be getting into next week, this whole pre-birth plan, what you're doing, why you're choosing a painful path. And most people do. Earth is a very difficult place to be. It's the toughest school in the universe, they say, is the law of equilibrium, is not only the paying off of a karmic debt, but to evolve, to learn, to grow. If we understood, and again, we will touch on this more in this episode and next week's, it's really important. This is called the ultimate law of equilibrium. It is karma and reincarnation. And with karma, knowing that there is an action for there is a reaction for every action. There is a cause for every effect. Just think, Tim. I sit here and think when I watch the news, I go, I would not want to have to pay off that karmic debt. That is a big one, because if you think about it, there would be no reason for law enforcement if we understood this huge immutable law, the law of balance. So that's what we're going to be talking about next episode. Could you touch on that for us about why we choose this pre-birth um, plan and how karma and reincarnation plays into that decision for us, please?
Well, prior to being reborn, and whether we do this alone or whether we do it in conjunction with those entities wiser than ourselves, I don't know. Probably at some stages we do both. But we decide what we need in the next life. We decide what it is we need to learn. We decide what mistakes need to be rectified, what part of our character needs to be strengthened, whether relationships need to be formed, whether there is some major task that we need to do in a life. There is, in other words, a soul purpose. Many people don't recognize that they have a soul purpose, but most people, in fact, probably all people do. And so we choose a life and an era and the socio-economic circumstances and the environment, which is going to suit that particular incarnation. We'll choose our gender and we'll choose our parents. And we choose this fairly early on from the moment of conception. The soul enters into that mother's womb. And so that process begins at the moment of fertilization. And we are part of that. And how the body of the child grows inside the mother is a fascinating process because it's not just physical. There are astral and higher entities involved at every stage in creating the astral, physical, and mental bodies of that child. So it's a really fascinating process. Why would we choose parents who are horrible to us? Well, there would seem to be no logical reason for that, but it might be something that we have to learn, or indeed, it might be something that they have to learn. We might be coming into life to teach them something. It's not just a one-way street. And the other thing I would say when we discuss this next week is that karma is not just individual. There's also collective karma. Organizations have karma. Countries have karma. Empires have karma. Planets have karma. Everything has karma. And if it's difficult enough to understand individual karma, how much more difficult is it to understand collective karma, which is the combined karma of everybody who's ever belonged to that football club or that company or that particular organization? Becomes almost impossible.
There is an endless amount of content that we can cover here. And as we talk about coming into this world where there is great suffering, but there's also great potential and great joy. We have been murdered before. We have been murderer. We have been a king and a slave. What we've been everything, most everything. And when we do come in, what kind of a person were we? What kind of a king were we? Were we selfish and greedy and cruel? What kind of a slave were we? Because it's just a day, a lifetime is dead, but just a day. You can evolve and become enlightened as a slave. But when you watch the news, Tim, and you observe humanity and you see folks coming in where they can really only see the material world and they don't care who they have to kill or murder or swindle or whatever to get to where they need to be. Do you ever watch with that eye thinking, I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't do that if I were you, because you're going to have, that'll have to balance out. And you see people kill and kill and kill and lie and lie and lie. And it just gets worse and worse. Do you think they really do believe that this is the only life that there is? Is there no thought of esoteric principles or balance?
I think for a great many people, they think this is the only life you get. And that's why they try to cling on to it. I know that survival is the most powerful human instinct, and we'll all stop things to happening so that we don't drown or don't fall off the top of a mountain, etc., etc. But some people do cling on to this life because they do believe at the end of it, there is only annihilation and oblivion. And that makes people think, well, I can do whatever I want in this life. There are no consequences. Who's going to punish me? God? Well, I don't believe in God. So to hell with it all. I'll just do my own thing. I'll rape the planet. I'll despoil its environment. I'll plunder its resources. And I'll do whatever I like because it doesn't matter.
What happens then when you wake up on the other side and you realize that every action, every thought, every deed will have to be balanced by you? You must experience what you have caused. To me, that is absolutely mortifying. And even going to sleep at night, I replay all these things thinking, oh, I could have done that better. I should have done that better. Have I made amends? I can't imagine what that must be like. This is one of the reasons we're doing this show, to help share these ancient teachings. They're not ours, ageless, perennial philosophy that belong to all and solely to none, going beyond science and religion to explain what many have come before and told us about death, about karma, about what takes place when we leave the physical body, that we definitely will leave the physical body. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing to be afraid of. And before we go on this episode, I do want to invite questions and comments, and please rate and subscribe and all that stuff. Thank you. We are reading your comments as we're getting going. And please share if you can with others so that they can have access to these teachings. You can find them online absolutely free. You don't need to subscribe or buy anything. You don't need to pay anybody. These are all available to you, and it goes by many names. You can look in Pythagoras' teachings. You can look in Plato talks about it. All of them. It's out there everywhere. But I wanted to ask you, you mentioned that there is a physical death first, and then there is a second death. So before we get to the pre-birth planning, I wanted to see if we could touch on the second death really quick, if this is the time or the place for that.
Well, at the end of our stay in the astral world, when our astral bodies have been purified and the best bits stored up in readiness for our next life, we then undergo a second death, in which we again go through some kind of life review. There are many different variations as to precisely what happens. And then we either move from the astral world to this higher, refined place of beauty, which is called Devachan, sometimes the land of the gods, the heaven world, the mental world. Or if we don't have any kind of refined principles within us, if we don't have any higher aspects to ourselves, there is no reason to go to this place because we wouldn't appreciate it. So those people who are not terribly evolved will tend to reincarnate directly from the astral plane. Or if they do go to this heaven world, they won't spend very long there. And there is much debate as to how long people spend in these after-death states. And you mentioned earlier on about Madame Blavatsky, the founder of Theosophy, talking about 1,500 years. But Plato spoke of 1,000 years. Subsequent theosophists spoke about cycles of 600 or 900 years. But that was then, and it may be that because of changes in world conditions, these periods are shorter or indeed longer. There have been some writers that have spoken about 3,000 years between lives. So you pays your money and you takes your choice here.
Well, it's true. It is true. They are coming in quicker, and it is fantastic because everybody's got a cell phone. They've got a mobile device that they can record what is happening in their lives. Many of the parents are coming in saying, my child is sharing this with me. There is proof of these reincarnations coming in. So we can't, modern technology is able to bring the stories online and people can understand and relate, and we're connecting that way. I believe that the internet is a positive thing. It can be used for bad, but I believe it is positive to share these stories of the quicker reincarnations and all of it, and even what we're doing here. And I wanted to ask also, many people think, okay, if I live a good life and then I get to stay in Devachan or heaven forever and ever, feeling bliss and joy. And I was able to accomplish all that in a lifetime of 80 years. What is the point? And this is one of the biggest things for me. What is the point of personal individual bliss if there are billions and billions of beings here on earth that are still in hell? What is the point?
Well, the point is that people need to come into incarnation as circumstances for that dictate. And people talk about going to Christianity and Islam and Judaism, the three Abrahamic religions, talk about them. It's all very vague about what heaven is. They all have their own version of it, and they all have their own version of the other place, the warmer place downstairs. But it's all very vague as to how long you're going to stay there. Would you want to be anywhere, for eternity? Because it's just like some sort of celestial waiting room. What are you waiting for? Well, some Christians believe that there will be a new Jerusalem and a new earth led by Jesus, and, the world will be revived and they will become reincarnated at that point. Other Christians just don't really think much about it at all and just imagine that heaven is a permanent state. But, imagine going to a 5-star luxury resort. Being there for a couple of weeks is fine. After a month, you're thinking, well, it's okay. After 6 months, you're thinking, this place is like a prison. I want to go back to my little cottage in Yorkshire, So however good something is, we're not suited as human beings to have something that just goes on forever. The universe is changing and churning all the time, and so are we. We need this particular change to happen in our lives. So nothing is permanent, not even this stay in heaven. And obviously, if we've been there before, then we'll go there again, most likely, unless we do something really bad. And yet it's strange the way that these memories, although we've been through these experiences many times, hundreds of times, possibly thousands of times, most people don't remember anything about it. Otherwise, they would believe in this stuff, wouldn't they? If they recalled it, they would believe in it.
That's absolutely the truth. Absolutely. And it's so true what you talk about. Eternal bliss, to me, if you played it out, sounds a little boring and to me, selfish. If there's other people who are hurting and suffering and they're still suffering, I would like to maybe take a night off. That sounds okay, a couple nights. I want to come back and serve and help others in whatever way that I can. And if that means coming back and coming back and coming back, that's what I would like to do. Because I believe that that is our purpose. That's just my own understanding. That's just where I'm coming from. Now, remember, this is Tim's quote. Death comes to all of us. That's not only Tim's quote, but it's not a tragedy and it's not fatal, final, or permanent. The reason we are doing these shows, it's called That Death Show, is to help ease the discomfort, remove the mystery and the fear that surrounds death, which will come to each and every one of us. Your questions, your comments, your negative, whatever, spew, whatever, talk to us. Tell us what you'd like us to cover. Tell us what you're enjoying, what you want us to do different, better. This is only our 3rd podcast. We humbly ask if you could subscribe and share. This will be available on YouTube and also wherever you get your podcasts. So we're getting it out on Spotify, Apple, iHeart, everywhere. So it's in audio and video. I do want to say, please pop over and take a look at That Death Show's YouTube channel and catch The Myth of Death. This is Tim's latest documentary, came out this summer. It's about 45 minutes long, and it is the most comforting, the most powerful short film about death that I think everybody should see. And in a way, it's the reason we're sitting in these chairs today. It has motivated us to go further. So it's called The Myth of Death, and there's always links to that on all the things that we do. So Tim, I look forward to next week with you. I mean, these, to me, I love this time. It flies by. Next week, we have karma and reincarnation, and we will still suit up and show up and be here every Wednesday for a brand new episode as we move forward. Do you have any final thoughts, Tim?
Yes, I would just like to say that a lot of this has been made possible by a wonderful organization called the Blavatsky Trust, who promote the works of Madame Blavatsky, the founder of Theosophy, and they have been extremely helpful with their support for this film and for many other projects as well. So we can only thank them a great deal for that.
Oh, they certainly have. And I'm so, so grateful for that because we're taking it out into the modern world. Thank you, Blavatsky Trust. Thank you, all of you who are here with us. And I look forward to seeing you next week, Tim, because reincarnation is making a comeback and it's going to come back in episode number 4 here on That Death Show. Have a fantastic night. Mwah. Thank you, Tim.
Thank you, Anne. Great to talk to you as always.
Death comes to us all, but death is not a tragedy. Everyone's Book of the Dead by Tim Wyatt reveals a whole new perspective on what lies beyond this earthly life. The Egyptians have a Book of the Dead. The Tibetans have a Book of the Dead. Shouldn't you have one too? This captivating, richly illustrated book explores the mystery of death by examining it from every angle, sharing the ageless esoteric teachings on karma, reincarnation, and after-death states, as well as examining death and dying in different cultures, religions, and spiritual traditions. Death is not fatal, final, or permanent, but simply a transitional doorway to a new beginning. Get your copy of Everyone's Book of the Dead today at firewheelbooks.co.uk.